Violence is one of the issues the nonprofit organization Force Detroit is really focusing on as it works to build a safer, freer city. The group brings together interfaith, grassroots, and public sector leaders to have the difficult conversations about complex issues in our community and to develop creative solutions. I spoke with Force Detroit's director, Alia Harvey Quinn. So I'm actually really eager to talk to you about this, given all of the things that are going on right now with gun violence in our country. But I think it's an important time to remind people that while these mass shootings are really disturbing and they are not an acceptable part of American life, that for those of us who live in places like Detroit, those of us who are part of the African American community, gun violence is a fairly regular part of life for far too many of us, and it's not episodic like these mass shootings. It's day to day, and I know that at Force Detroit, that's what you're really focused on, is changing that for us in our communities.
Yeah, unfortunately, violence has become a normal part of way too many poor and oppressed people of cultures of color day-to-day lives. And so that has forced us to find solutions that are like unique and creative, out of the box. Those solutions have become, over the years, evidence-based, tried and true solutions. And across the country, we've been working to implement them. You know, I'm tied up with a network of organizers and organizations that do violence interruption. So it is important to remember in a moment like this that Black and Brown communities have been dealing with violence for years, epidemic levels of violence for years, and that our young people are learning violence as the new normal, and that we have victims that are embedded in community that are suffering with grief and unable to escape it because it's happened over and over and over. And solutions are here and they need to be publicly resourced and supported.
Yeah. Let's talk about how you have to approach this issue in a city like Detroit. I get kind of tired of the argument about whether it's guns or whether it's environment or social structure. It's not an either or, it's both and I know that you are focused on, again, both of these things. You've got to solve it at every turn.
No, I appreciate that, because usually in these types of segments there is not time to nuance these conversations, right? Like Black people are concerned with the fact that a 5-year-old got shot in the face twice on Evergreen about a month ago, and we are also concerned with the fact that there's another 5-year-old in the same neighborhood going home to a household without his parent or his or her parent due to incarceration. And so like there's a very narrow spectrum of expertise that can help us solve for violence without further incarcerating our over-criminalized community. It's important to just say like that we've got to recognize the expertise of community, the lived experience of peacemakers. Yes, sir.
And so let's talk about how those solutions play out in a city like Detroit. I think a lot of people from the outside especially look at the violence in a city like Detroit and say, oh my gosh, I don't know what you would do. It seems unsolvable. What are your focus points?
Yeah, so literally building relationships that help us challenge the cultural standard of violence is the only way out of this. And that is relationships at every level. We need to be building relationships with the community of faith so that there is renewed hope, right? So that we are setting higher standards. We need to build relationships with peacemakers so that they can stop violence in the moment. We need to be building relationships with high risk likely and probable shooters, so that we can transition them out of that lifestyle and meet the trauma, the traumatic needs that is causing the violence in the first place. We need to build relationships with victims so we can help that healing situation happen. And we need to be building relationships with our young people so that they know that this is not how we should live, so that we're raising the next generation. We're creating a new sort of standard.
The best way, of course, to do this, especially with young people, is to give them agency over these kind of things, to train them and their leaders, to spread this message. But that's also one of the hardest ways to do this, of course, because they're young people. Talk about how you reach both kids who are at risk, to send them in another direction, but then also how you identify young people who can be powerful voices for these messages.
Yeah, so I think, like, if we're honest with ourselves, seasoned professionals don't. We just don't. Like, we have to trust credible messengers on the ground who have transitioned out of those lifestyles, but have retained their relationships, to use those relationships for peace. And I think one of the problems is that we try to box this up. We want this to look like a normal nonprofit. We want it to be cutesy and follow the trends. And I just left out of a retreat, and as out of the box as we already are, the people who are at the center of the trauma are saying, we need you to meet us closer to where we are, Alia. And I thought I was doing a good job.
Yeah, no, that's hard. So give us a sense of the march that you recently participated in, and whether you feel like are we winning this battle? I know that's kind of a cliched way to think about it, but are we headed in the right direction? And do marches like that give you the sense that there is appeal and power behind what you're doing?
Yeah, so let me tell you what I love about the organizing work of the Church of the Messiah and Pastor Barry and the Silence the Violence Parade overall. I love the fact that there are so many very, very passionate peacemakers, all in the same space, all with different models. When these models intersect, there's a great, great deal of tension usually. But at this march, there is, one voice, one band, one sound. We are acknowledging that we really all have the same sort of self-interest to see Detroit be a safer and freer city. And we all show up in harmony. Like, I just love that. I mean, so it's always like a reunion of sorts, because there's a small community of folks that do this work really intensely, and everybody knows each other. COVID has isolated us. It's just good to grab hugs and be with people in shared space with a common mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from there, I would imagine there's this sense of momentum, right? That the work flows from that energy.
No, sir. Because unfortunately, people have to choose, and there are so many like brilliant peacemakers, right? Like, shout out to Tafari Brent, shout out to Minister Malik Shabazz, to Ortegas Jackson, to the organizer Daryl Woods. There are so many peacemakers who could be in this space full time who are just not.
Who aren't? Oh. Wow.
Yeah, because we have not carved out public allocations to resource this work, and it's heavy. The expenses are heavy, right? Relocating an active shooter is going to be expensive, right? If there's somebody who, we have an inside track that he or she may be robbing people to meet their basic needs, right? Meeting their basic needs may be expensive, right? training folks for employment. And I don't mean like these lighthearted, let me help you get a resume, like programs. I really mean, if you have somebody who is trusting you to take him or herself from a point where, you know, in which they identify jobs as countercultural to who they actually are, right? They may not have grown up in a household with their mom and their dad watching them sort of go to work, do the routine, come home, wind down, sit down for dinner, right? That would be establishing a new norm for him or her, right? And so like the socialization of that process is gradual and intense, and it's heavily based on relationship and on trust, right? And so like even me, I'm not directly working in the streets. I don't have the expertise to do that. Right. What I can do is lend the nonprofit infrastructure to the people who do have the expertise, build deep relationships with them, and trust them to show up as their best selves.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, of course, on the work, and obviously it's really vital to solving this problem. Thanks for being with us here on American Black Journal.
Yeah, thank you for having me.